Congratulations. You have just awoken in the vast, untamed expanse of 1875, a place where the sun rises with a certain fierce promise, even on the dust-choked streets of Dusty Creek, Kansas. As your eyes slowly flutter open, it isn't the pale morning light that first greets you, nor the quiet whisper of the nascent day. No, it is a symphony of scents that fills your nostrils, a pungent, unmistakable cocktail of horse manure, the earthy scent of unwashed bodies, and perhaps something else, something sharper, like rotting meat drifting from the butcher shop just down the street. The very air around you feels thick, almost chewable, heavy with the fine, pervasive dust that has been perpetually kicked up by countless boots and hooves traversing the dirt paths that bravely pass for streets in this frontier town you now call home. You lie still for a moment on what loosely qualifies as a bed. It is a simple wooden frame strung with thick ropes that cradle a mattress stuffed with dry, rustling straw. Every small breath you take, every tiny shift of your weight, creates a soft, crackling sound like autumn leaves scuttling across a forgotten field. The straw, coarse and persistent, pokes relentlessly through the thin fabric of the mattress, jabbing into your back like 100 tiny, insistent needles, a constant, gentle reminder that true comfort is a luxury seldom found out here, a privilege reserved for those distant folks back east. Your blanket, if it can even truly be called that, is a rough, unyielding wool affair, a coarse weave that feels as if it were spun from the very spite of the sheep it once clothed. It scrapes and scratches against your skin with every movement, yet it remains the sole fragile barrier standing between your body and the bone. Deep chill that relentlessly creeps through the haphazard gaps in the wooden walls of your humble room. Now, for a moment of good news in this rugged landscape, you are the newly elected sheriff of Dusty Creek, Kansas. A town whose population on a truly good day might optimistically reach 300 souls. Perhaps a few more when the cattle drivers aren't all deep in their cups, snoring away their troubles in your small jail cells. But then there is the bad news, a long, winding list of it. Your predecessor, a man named Sheriff Thompson, vanished into the pre-dawn hours not so long ago, taking with him half of the county's meager tax money. The other half, it seems, was purportedly spent on what he vaguely described as essential law enforcement supplies, which later revealed themselves to be a month-long poker game and enough whiskey to, as the saying goes, drown a horse. Such is the legacy you inherit, a badge of honor, perhaps, but also a badge of profound financial and practical challenge. The cold floorboards with a soft groan, you finally swing your legs over the side of your rope bed, and an immediate, sharp regret washes over you. The bare floorboards beneath your feet are shockingly cold, so frigid they might as well be slabs of ice, sending a jolt up your legs. With every tentative step you take, the old wood groans in protest, a mournful sound echoing through your small room, like the timbers of a ship straining against a furious storm at sea. This humble space, your only quarters, sits directly above Murphy's General Store, the solitary accommodation you could afford on a sheriff's meager salary. And speaking of that salary, it is hardly enough to entice a man into this line of work. Your base pay is a paltry $200 a year, though there is the tantalizing possibility of earning up to $4,000 if you prove exceptionally diligent at collecting fees for serving papers and arresting folks. The catch, however, is a bitter pill to swallow. Any fees you manage to collect must be generously shared with any deputies you might manage to hire. Assuming, of course, you can find anyone desperate or courageous enough to pin on a badge in this particularly lawless corner of the world. Your morning ritual unfolds in the lingering pre-dawn darkness, a quiet, fumbling ballet of motion. There are no electric lights here, only the sputtering glow of a kerosene lamp that smokes like a labouring locomotive, casting about as much light as a firefly suffering from cataracts. Your sheriff's outfit, draped over a rickety chair, is hardly what one might call impressive. It's a brown wool suit, clearly a veteran of better decades, with pants that are too short and a jacket that feels perpetually too tight. The fabric, worn thin in places, feels like coarse sandpaper against your skin, especially where the persistent sweat stains have rendered it permanently stiff, almost board-like. Your hat, a crumpled, tired thing, is more a suggestion of headwear than a proper brimmed protector. Its brim droops mournfully like a sad dog's ears, and the crown bears a distinct dent from where you unceremoniously dropped it yesterday. In the midst of a surprisingly vigorous chase after old Pete's escaped pig down the length of Main Street. But the true emblem of your authority, the tangible weight of your new responsibilities, hangs heavily on your hip, a Colt .45, a formidable piece of steel that weighs about as much as a newborn calf. The worn leather holster creaks softly with every shift of your body, a low, rhythmic whisper, and the gun itself feels as though it could pull your entire body sideways if you aren't careful. You've practiced drawing it, perhaps a dozen times, in the quiet solitude of your room, and your accuracy, you grimly admit, is about as reliable as a drunk throwing darts in a windstorm. Yet, in this raw, unpredictable landscape, you constantly remind yourself intimidation often counts for far more than marksmanship. At least, that is what you desperately try to believe. Dust and whispers on Main Street, your first task of the day, as the new sheriff, is not exactly glamorous. It begins with the mundane but necessary ritual of making your morning rounds, which means a slow, deliberate walk down Main Street to collect the assorted trash that has accumulated overnight. Yes, you heard correctly, the county sheriff, acting as a reluctant street sweeper. Last night, it seems, was particularly eventful, judging by the scattered collection of broken bottles, soggy cigar butts, and what appears to be a solitary lost boot strewn across the dirt road. The shards of glass crunch softly under your worn boots, like dry bones snapping, and you make a mental note to issue a quiet warning to folks about the perils of walking barefoot in the mornings. The town is just beginning to stir, a slow, hesitant awakening as you commence your unlikely clean-up duties. Wisps of smoke curl lazily from chimneys, unfurling into the crisp air like ethereal grey ribbons, and the first indistinct sounds of the day begin to drift out from behind tightly closed doors, the harsh, rattling cough of someone struggling for breath, the plaintive cry of a baby, and the steady, rhythmic thunk of an axe biting into wood. Your own breath escapes in small, misty puffs of steam in the cold morning air, and despite the worn leather gloves you wear, your fingers are already going numb, their tips losing sensation to the persistent chill. Murphy's General Store, a solid, dependable presence, sits directly below your room, and old Murphy himself emerges just as you are sweeping past his front door. He is a grizzled man, his face weathered like old saddle leather, with a beard so thick and unruly, it looks as though it could easily hide small woodland creatures. He carries with him the perpetual scent of strong coffee grounds and cured leather oil. "Morning, Sheriff," he rasps his voice, a curious blend of respect and an almost palpable pity. Everyone in town, you know, understands that this particular job is, in essence, a death sentence adorned with a badge. "Morning, Murphy," you reply, your own voice a little hoarse from the dry, cold air. "Any trouble last night?" Murphy spits a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dirt, where it vanishes almost immediately into the ever-present dust. "Nothing you need to worry yourself about," he grumbles. "Just the usual crowd at Salty Sue's, getting a little too friendly with the working girls." Salty Sue's, the town's combination saloon and brothel, is a ramshackle building, perpetually leaning to one side as if it too is perpetually drunk. It's painted a faded red, now more a sorrowful pink than anything else, and the piano inside, even from this distance, sounds as though it is being played by someone wearing boxing gloves. You nod and continue your slow, methodical sweep, gathering up the scattered debris from last night's festivities. It is more than just trash. It is silent evidence of how your community spends its evenings. Broken whiskey bottles tell unspoken tales of fights that likely erupted over card games, or women, or perhaps just a general simmering surliness. Cigar butts indicate the presence of men with at least a little money to burn, and that solitary lost boot. Well, somebody is undoubtedly walking home with one bare foot this morning, a story you will likely hear whispered about later in the day. The scent of the jail, the sun, is now beginning its slow, majestic ascent over the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of fiery orange and soft, blushing pink. It would be a truly beautiful sight, you think, if your mind weren't so relentlessly focused on the stark realities of survival. The intensifying light, however, cruelly illuminates just how rough and unforgiving this place truly is. The buildings lining Main Street appear as though they were haphazardly thrown together by someone who had never quite grasped the fundamental concept of a proper sturdy structure. They lean precariously on each other for support, held together by a fragile combination of sheer hope, rusty nails, and the occasional desperate prayer. Paint here is an unimaginable luxury. Most of the wood has weathered to a drab, uniform grey, a colour that perfectly matches the pervasive, suffocating dust that coats absolutely everything. Your next stop is the jail, a structure optimistically christened the County Detention Facility, but which is, in stark reality, little more than a crude wooden box, fortified with rough iron bars across its small windows. It is about the size of a decent chicken coop, and you know, even from a distance, that it smells considerably worse. The jail sits stoically at the very end of Main Street, a definitive period mark at the close of a particularly depressing sentence. As you draw nearer, a rhythmic, guttural snoring becomes audible from within. Apparently, you have at least one guest still sleeping off the poor decisions of last night. The heavy iron key to the jail, a cold, unyielding presence, hangs on a ring attached to your belt, almost as heavy as your gun. The lock, as always, sticks stubbornly. You have to jiggle the key with practiced frustration, at the same time putting your shoulder against the rough wooden door, grunting softly with effort. When it finally gives way with a reluctant groan, the smell hits you with the force of a physical blow. It is an overwhelming cocktail of unwashed bodies, stale, sour alcohol, and the unmistakable, truly regrettable aroma of someone who didn't quite manage to make it to the chamber pot in time. Inside, curled up on the single hard wooden bench that serves as the prisoner's bed, using his battered hat as a makeshift pillow, you find Jake Morrison. He is a local ranch hand who, it seems, thought it an excellent idea to start a fight with a man twice his size over a single poker hand. Jake is a young fellow, perhaps 25, with sandy hair perpetually falling into his eyes, and a face that bears the faint tail marks of many poor decisions made before this one. His clothes are rumpled and stained, and there is a stark smear of dried blood on his knuckles, a silent testament to last night's unfortunate altercation. Jake, you say, your voice surprisingly unkindly. Time to wake up. He groans, a low pain sound, and slowly opens one bloodshot eye. Sheriff, he mumbles, then with a deeper groan, "Oh hell, what time is it?" "Time for you to pay your fine and get on with your life," you reply. The fine for disturbing the peace is $2, more money than Jake likely has, but still considerably less than the cost of feeding him for a week. "You got $2, or do I need to send word to your boss?" Jake sits up slowly, painfully, clutching his head as if it might simply fall off if he moves too quickly. "I got it, Sheriff," he rasps. "Just give me a minute for the world to stop spinning." This, you reflect, is the glamorous life of a Wild West sheriff, collecting paltry fines from hungover ranch hands and meticulously sweeping up broken glass. But you are about to learn that the boring, mundane parts of this job are in fact the truly good parts, because in a few short hours you are going to face the kind of situation that, with chilling clarity, explains why most sheriffs don't last very long in this demanding, dangerous position. The weight of the badge while Jake fumbles awkwardly in his pockets for his money. You take a quiet moment to check your other essential equipment. Besides the ever-present Colt on your hip, you carry a sturdy wooden baton, its surface worn smooth by countless hands and decades of use. There is also a pair of heavy iron handcuffs, cold and clunky, that probably weigh more than a horseshoe. And then there is your sheriff's badge, a piece of tin that is more dented and scratched than shiny. This badge, you know, is supposed to be your irrefutable symbol of authority. Yet out here, true authority is more about how quickly you can draw your weapon than how brightly your badge gleams in the harsh sunlight. That very badge, you realize, tells its own silent story. It once belonged to your predecessor, Sheriff Tom Bradley, a man who left town under circumstances that absolutely nobody in Dusty Creek likes to discuss. The distinct dent in the upper right corner, you've been told, came from a bullet that grazed it during what the local newspaper politely, almost euphemistically, called a disagreement with local citizens. The chilling fact that Bradley lived to hand over the badge to you makes him, by far, luckier than most sheriffs in these parts. Finally, Jake produces 2 crumpled dollar bills from the depths of his pocket, along with enough lint to stuff a small pillow. You take the money, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in your hand, and unlock his cell. He stumbles out into the nascent morning light, blinking like a mole emerging from its dark hole. "Try to keep the fighting to daylight hours, Jake," you tell him, your voice a little softer now. "I need my sleep." He tips his hat, or rather tries to tip his hat, nearly losing his balance in the process, and shuffles off toward the stable, where his horse is probably wondering where on earth he has been. You watch him go, already knowing, with a sense of weary inevitability, that you will likely see him again next weekend. Jake, you reflect, has a particular talent for bad decisions, and a liver that seems capable of handling more alcohol than a small distillery. With your morning rounds now completed, a familiar weight settling in your shoulders, you head back to your office. It isn't really an office, of course, but merely a desk and a single chair, rather unceremoniously squeezed into a quiet corner of Murphy's general store. Murphy, ever the pragmatist, allows you to use the space in exchange for you keeping a watchful eye on his merchandise when he's not around. An arrangement that mutually benefits you both, as you desperately need the free space, and he, perhaps even more desperately, needs someone to watch for shoplifters and general troublemakers. Your desk is a scarred, dark wooden thing, bearing the unmistakable marks of decades of use. Previous sheriffs, you notice, have carved their initials into its surface, along with what appear to be tally marks, perhaps counting the number of days they managed to survive on the job. The current record, according to these crude marks, is held by someone with the initials RJ, who, with remarkable tenacity, apparently lasted 4 months and 3 days. The shortest tenure belongs to a mysterious WK, who, with a tragic brevity, managed exactly 6 days before circumstances, unspoken but easily imagined, forced him to seek employment elsewhere, or, more likely, a cemetery plot. On top of this venerable desk sits your paperwork, and there is, to your quiet dismay, far more of it than you ever anticipated. It turns out, being a sheriff involves a surprising, almost infuriating amount of writing. You have warrants to serve, taxes to collect from reluctant citizens, and an endless stream of reports to meticulously file with the county government. The county, a distant, demanding entity, expects regular updates on criminal activity, jail occupancy rates, and the precise collection of fees. They also demand detailed records of any firearms confiscated, property seized, and fines levied. All of this, you realize with a sigh, has to be written by hand, and your handwriting, you grudgingly admit, already looks like a spider fell into an inkwell and died a slow, agonizing death across the paper. The tax collection part of your job is particularly challenging. You are, by decree of the county, directly responsible for collecting property taxes from every single landowner, big or small, within the county. Many of them, you've quickly discovered, view this as an utterly unreasonable and deeply intrusive government imposition. Some pay without complaint, with a quiet resignation. Others, however, require a gentle, firm persuasion, and a select few, will require you to bring along backup, preferably the kind of backup that comes well, armed and ready for trouble. Today's tax collection route includes a necessary visit to the widow Thompson, who owns a small, struggling farm just outside town. Mrs. Thompson is a formidable woman, her face etched with the hardships of the frontier, who lost her husband to consumption last winter and has been running the farm herself ever since, with a stubborn, fierce independence. She has been expertly dodging tax payments for 3 months now, consistently claiming she simply doesn't have the money. The problem, you muse, is that you've seen her at the general store buying supplies that suggest her financial situation might not be quite as dire as she so eloquently claims. A visit to Salty Sue's before you head out to the Thompson place. A necessary stop at Salty Sue's is in order to check on last night's disturbance. The saloon is technically closed this early in the morning, but a thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney tells you that Sue is likely already up, diligently cleaning up from last night's boisterous business. Sue, a woman of unyielding will, runs the only establishment offering entertainment for 50 miles in any direction, a fact which grants her considerable, undeniable influence in the quiet politics of the town. She is also, it is widely believed, the only person who truly knows where all the bodies are buried in this county. Sometimes you suspect, literally. The walk to Salty Sue's takes you past the blacksmith shop, where the immense fires are already roaring to life, casting a warm orange glow, and the rhythmic sound of hammer on anvil rings out, a metallic heartbeat across the cool morning air. The blacksmith himself, a massive man known affectionately as Big Jim, waves at you from deep inside his smoky shop. Jim is one of your unofficial deputies. He doesn't wear a badge. But when trouble inevitably breaks out, he is usually more than willing to grab a hammer and help restore a semblance of order. His arms are like tree trunks, thick and corded with muscle, and his hands, you often think, could probably crush walnuts without breaking a single bead of sweat. Salty Sue's establishment sits at the opposite end of town from the jail, a placement that is probably not a mere coincidence. The building is considerably larger than most others in town, boasting a second floor where the working girls conduct their business. The ground floor serves as a lively saloon, a boisterous gambling hall, and a general gathering place for anyone looking to spend money on liquid courage or temporary companionship. The paint job, a surprisingly vibrant red, is noticeably fresher than most buildings in town, and there are even actual glass windows, real luxuries in a place as rough, hewn as Dusty Creek. You push through the swinging bat-wing doors and immediately step into a different world, a palpable shift in atmosphere. The interior of Salty Sue's is dimly lit, perpetually bathed in a soft, hazy gloom, and it smells of stale tobacco smoke, the sweet, sour tang of spilled whiskey, and something else, something cloyingly sweet that might be perfume, but could just as easily be floor cleaner. The rough wooden floors are sticky with decades of spilled drinks, their surfaces stained dark by constant heavy foot traffic and questionable cleaning practices. Sue herself is behind the long, scarred bar, meticulously wiping down glasses with a rag that has definitely seen better days. She is a woman of uncertain age, anywhere from 35 to 55, depending on the shifting light and how much whiskey you've had. Her dress, a striking red, is revealing in a way that makes the establishment's secondary purpose abundantly clear. She looks up as you enter, and her smile, you note, is as sharp as a razor blade. "Mornin', Sheriff," she says, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who has spent years in smoky, raucous rooms. "Murphy mentioned there was some trouble last night," you reply, settling onto one of the worn bar stools. The stool creaks softly under your weight, and you make a mental note not to lean back too far. "Anything I need to know about?" Sue continues, polishing her glass, though it was probably spotlessly clean 3 wipes ago. Nothing too serious, she finally says, dismissing your concern with a flick of her wrist. Just a couple of cowboys getting a little too familiar with my girls. Big Jim helped me sort it out. She nods casually toward the back corner. And you notice for the first time that one of the tables has a leg that has clearly been recently, crudely repaired. Any damages I need to document, you ask? Part of your job, the mundane part, involves keeping track of property damage that might eventually result in civil claims. It's boring work, you acknowledge, but it helps prevent larger conflicts down the road. Just the table leg, and that's already fixed, Sue replies, her eyes twinkling. The boys involved were from the Circle K ranch. They paid for the damage and apologized to the girls. No need for official action. You make a mental note to check with the Circle K foreman next time you're out that way. Ranchers, generally prefer to keep their cowboys in line, but it's still worth letting them know when their men cause trouble in town. It's also, you realize, worth staying on good terms with the ranches. They employ most of the county's working men, and their political support can, and often does, make or break a sheriff's career. As you prepare to leave Salty Sue's, she calls out to you, her voice softer now, almost a conspiratorial whisper. Sheriff, you might want to know, there's been talk about some of the ranchers organizing their own law enforcement. Something about not trusting county officials. This stops you cold, a sudden chill spreading through your body. Vigilante groups are every sheriff's nightmare. When citizens begin to take the law into their own hands, it usually means they've lost all faith in official law enforcement. And once vigilantes get organized, they often decide that the sheriff himself is part of the problem they need to solve. What kind of talk, you ask, trying your best to keep your voice casual, unconcerned. Sue shrugs, but her eyes, you notice, are serious, devoid of their usual playful glint. Nothing specific, just grumbling about taxes and federal interference. But you know how these things start. First, it's complaints about government. Then it's complaints about the people enforcing government rules. You thank Sue for the information, a cold knot forming in your stomach, and step back out into the morning sun, which is now bright enough to make you squint. The warmth feels good on your face, but Sue's quiet warning has put a chill in your bones that has nothing at all to do with the weather. Vigilante justice, is swift, brutal, and often completely arbitrary, and sheriffs who find themselves on the wrong side of vigilante groups tend to end up decorating tree branches with rope necklaces. A looming shadow, the rest of your morning is spent on routine, almost mundane tasks, a quiet hum of activity. You check with the telegraph operator, a nervous man named Ezra, who perpetually smells of machine oil and strong coffee, to see if any warrants have come in from other counties. The clicks and whirs of the machine, a steady backdrop. You stop by the bank to dutifully deposit yesterday's meagre fee collections. The clink of coins, a small, satisfying sound, and you make your presence known on Main Street, a visible, reassuring presence. This last part, is far more important than it sounds. Half of being a sheriff, you've quickly learned, is simply being visible, allowing people to see that law enforcement is present, watchful, and paying attention. As you walk the dusty streets of Dusty Creek, your boots kicking up small clouds of fine red earth, you can't help but let your thoughts drift to the men who held this demanding, dangerous job before you. Some, you've heard, left for better opportunities, vanishing quietly into the vast frontier. Others left in wooden boxes, their lives cut tragically short. A few simply disappeared one night, never to be seen again, their fates whispered about in hushed tones. The life expectancy of a Wild West sheriff, you grimly acknowledge, is not exactly encouraging. It's a job where retirement planning involves little more than hoping you live long enough to actually need it. But for now, you are alive, you are employed, and you have, against the odds, made it through another morning without anyone shooting at you. In the precarious world of frontier law enforcement, That, you realize with a small, weary sigh, counts as a profoundly successful start to the day. The real challenges, are still ahead. The difficult tax collection, the tangled jurisdictional disputes, the insidious whispers of corrupt officials, and the ever-present, suffocating threat of violence that hangs like a dark cloud over every single decision you make. As the sun climbs higher in the impossibly blue sky, its warmth spreading across the land, and the town slowly begins to bustle with the growing energy of activity, you steel yourself for whatever the long day might bring. Because being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't just about keeping the peace or settling petty squabbles. It's about surviving long enough to see another sunset. And in a place where justice often comes at the end of a gun barrel, and the law is whatever the strongest man says it is, survival, with a chilling certainty, is never ever guaranteed. Then the afternoon, a quiet, unsuspecting time, brings your first real test as sheriff, and it arrives in the formidable form of a man wearing a federal marshal's badge. A man who looks, from his very first step off the noon stage, like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. Deputy Marshal Robert Weidenman steps onto the dusty street, with the kind of expression that clearly suggests he is here to make someone's life considerably more complicated. And since you are, at this precise moment, the only visible law enforcement officer, that someone you instinctively know is probably you. Weidenman is a tall, lean man, his figure cutting a sharp silhouette against the bright sky, with a mustache that has been meticulously waxed to aggressively sharp points. His eyes, keen and piercing, scan the street with a relentless, almost predatory intensity, as if he is actively searching for trouble. His badge, a polished, gleaming silver, catches the sunlight, obviously far better maintained than your own battered, dull piece of tin. His clothes are impeccably clean, far cleaner than anything you have seen in months. A black wool coat that actually fits properly, pants without a single visible stain, and boots that look as though they have been polished with something far more refined than spit and hope. "You the county sheriff?" he asks, his voice carrying the calm, unshakable authority of someone who is accustomed to being the most important person in any room he enters. "That's me," you reply, extending a hand that he examines with a disconcerting intensity, as if it might be carrying some unknown disease, before shaking it briefly, almost reluctantly. "Sheriff Anderson. What brings you to Dusty Creek, Marshal?" Weidenman reaches into his coat, his movements precise and economical, and produces a folded document that crackles softly, like dry leaves as he unfolds it. "Federal warrant for the arrest of Samuel Crane, wanted for mail theft. I have reason to believe he's in your jurisdiction." The name hits you like a sudden, unexpected punch to the gut. Sam Crane. He runs the livery stable, a quiet, hard-working man, and is, remarkably, one of the few businessmen in town who actually pays his taxes on time without complaint. He's also been known, with quiet generosity, to extend credit to folks who can't quite afford to board their horses, a gesture that makes him particularly popular with the working men of Dusty Creek. The idea that Sam Crane is involved in stealing mail seems as likely, you think, as snow falling in July, but you keep that opinion, a swirling mix of disbelief and concern, carefully to yourself. A choice between loyalties. You sure you got the right man? You ask, your voice betraying a hint of your disbelief as you scan the warrant. The description, you note, is vague enough to fit half the men in the county. Brown hair, average height, sometime mustache. Sam Crane's been running the stable here for near 3 years. Never had any trouble with him. Weidenman's smile, if it can even be called that, is as cold and sharp as a January wind. That's what makes him a good criminal, Sheriff. His gaze hardens, his eyes piercing. "Now, are you going to assist me in serving this warrant, or do I need to question your commitment to federal law enforcement?" And there it is, the dreaded question that every county sheriff, no matter how seasoned, secretly fears. Federal marshals, possess an authority, that technically supersedes local law enforcement, a frustrating reality of frontier governance. Yet, they are also outsiders, men who simply cannot or will not understand the intricate web of local politics, the unspoken loyalties, or the delicate relationships that bind this small community together. If you help Weidenman arrest Sam Crane, you will inevitably lose the crucial support of every businessman in town, a blow from which your burgeoning career might never recover. If you refuse to help him, however, you could find yourself facing grave federal charges for obstruction of justice, a fate that could easily end your career and perhaps your freedom in a flash. Your stomach churns with a sickening lurch, as if you've swallowed a handful of rusty nails. The coffee you had this morning, usually a comforting warmth, now tastes like bitter, coppery pennies in your mouth. You can feel a cold sweat beginning to gather under your arms, despite the cool, crisp afternoon air. The very badge on your chest suddenly feels heavier than usual, pulling at your shirt like it's trying to drag you down into the dirt, into the impossible choices that define this job. "I'll assist you, Marshal," you say, the words feeling foreign on your tongue, for refusing, you know, isn't truly an option. "But I'd like to see the evidence against Crane before we make the arrest." Weidenman, with a dismissive flick of his wrist, folds the warrant and tucks it back inside his impeccably clean coat. "The evidence is sufficient for federal prosecutors. That's all you need to know." This, you realize with a sinking feeling, is the part of being a sheriff that no one ever talks about in the dime novels, the part filled not with dramatic shootouts, but with insidious politics. You are not simply enforcing the law. You are constantly navigating a treacherous maze of competing jurisdictions, conflicting loyalties, and a distant federal oversight that can, with a single arbitrary decision, make or break your entire career. Town marshals can be elected or appointed, and they don't always see eye to eye with county sheriffs. Federal marshals answer only to Washington, a distant, unreachable entity, not to local voters. And military officers, operate under their own entirely different sets of rules. The walk to Crane's livery stable feels interminable, like a slow, deliberate death march. Your heavy boots crunch softly on the gravel and dirt, each measured step sending small, swirling clouds of dust dancing around your ankles. The afternoon sun, bright and relentless, beats down on your back, making your wool coat feel like you're wearing a blanket made of sandpaper. Sweat trickles, cold and insistent, down your spine, gathering at the small of your back where your gun belt sits. A constant, heavy presence. Main Street is busier now, a quiet hum of activity with afternoon shoppers and workers moving methodically between the various businesses. Mrs. Henderson, a woman you've often exchanged pleasantries with, nods politely as you pass, but you can clearly see the burning curiosity in her eyes when she notices the federal marshal walking grimly beside you. News travels swiftly in a small town, carried on the wind, and by evening everyone will know that federal law enforcement has come calling. The livery stable sits at the north end of town, a large, weathered wooden building that carries the comforting, earthy smells of hay, horse sweat, and rich leather oil. Sam Crane is inside, just as you expected, methodically mucking out stalls with the quiet efficiency of a man who takes deep, abiding pride in his honest work. He is a compact man, perhaps in his 40s, with arms made strong by years of handling powerful horses and heavy equipment. His clothes are practical: worn canvas pants, a simple cotton shirt, and a thick leather apron, stained with decades of honest labour. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Sam calls out, his voice cheerful and open, as he spots you. His expression, however, changes instantly, shifting to something far more cautious, when he notices Weidenman standing beside you. "Marshal Sam Crane?" Weidenman asks, though he already clearly knows the answer. "That's me." Weidenman produces the warrant again, the crackling sound strangely loud in the quiet stable. You're under arrest for theft of United States mail. You'll need to come with us." The colour drains from Sam's face, swiftly and completely, like water running out of a bucket. "Mail theft? I never, Sheriff. You know me. When have I ever stolen anything? And that, you think, is the worst, most agonizing part. You do know, Sam, and this, you agree, simply doesn't make any sense. But federal warrants, you realize with a cold dread, don't care about your personal opinions or the delicate nuances of local relationships. You have two stark choices: enforce the warrant or find yourself irrevocably on the wrong side of federal law enforcement. A heavy hand of justice. "I'm sorry, Sam," you say, and you genuinely mean it, the words feeling heavy on your tongue. "You'll need to come with us. We'll sort this out at the jail." Sam sets down his pitchfork slowly, deliberately, like a man moving through deep, viscous water, his movements heavy with resignation. "Can I at least finish with the horses? They need to be fed and watered." "The horses can wait," Weidenman cuts in, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Federal business takes priority." This, you realize, is where things become complicated in ways that most people outside this life would never understand about frontier law enforcement. Sam Crane isn't just a citizen to be arrested. He is a businessman, a vital thread in the fabric of this town, who employs two men and provides essential services to the entire community. Arresting him now will leave the livery stable unattended, which means horses won't be cared for, and weary travellers won't have a place to stable their animals. In a frontier town, disrupting essential services can have unforeseen consequences that ripple through the entire community, creating discontent and instability. "Marshal," you say carefully, choosing your words with precision, "if we could just let Sam arrange for someone to cover the stable." "No delays," Weidenman cuts you off again, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The warrant is to be served immediately." You produce your handcuffs, heavy iron things that weigh about as much as a horseshoe and feel twice as cold. The metal is rough against your palms, and the key, as always, sticks in the lock, just like everything else in this frustrating, unpredictable job. Sam holds out his hands without being asked, resignation etched across his face, like he's already accepted whatever cruel fate awaits him. The walk back to the jail is even worse than the walk to the stable. Word has spread through the town, carried on whispers and hurried footsteps, and people are gathering along Main Street to watch the grim procession. Some faces show only curiosity, their eyes wide and unblinking. Others display concern, a furrowing of brows and a tightening of lips. And a few, you notice, display a simmering anger, a silent suggestion that not everyone supports this distant federal interference in their local affairs. You can hear whispered conversations as you pass, fragments of sentences that don't bode well for future community relations. Federal government overreach. Sam never hurt nobody. What's next? They going to arrest us for breathing? Back at the jail, you unlock the small, dark cell that Jake Morrison vacated this morning and gesture for Sam to enter. The cell looks even smaller and more depressing than usual, a suffocating box, and the smell, you grimace, hasn't improved since your morning visit. Sam settles heavily on the wooden bench that serves as a bed, and for a moment he looks older than his 40-some years defeated. "Sheriff," he says quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "my wife doesn't know about this. Could you?" "I'll stop by and let her know," you promise, your voice soft, knowing it's the very least you can do. Weidenman, meanwhile, has been examining your jail with the disdainful expression of a man who has found something distasteful stuck to his polished shoe. "This facility doesn't meet federal standards for prisoner detention," he announces, his voice clipped and critical. "It's what we've got," you reply, trying, with considerable effort, to keep the rising irritation out of your voice. "Sam will be safe here until the circuit judge comes through. The prisoner will be transferred to the federal facility in Wichita tomorrow morning. Weidenman informs you, his tone final, "I'll be staying in town overnight to ensure the transfer goes smoothly." This, you realize with a weary sigh, means you've got to feed and guard Sam for the entire night, then arrange transportation to Wichita, all at county expense, for a federal case. It's another one of those lovely unspoken aspects of frontier law enforcement that nobody ever mentions when they're pinning the badge on your chest. The price of order as evening approaches, casting long purple shadows across the dusty street, you find yourself dealing with another challenge, one that is uniquely Western gun control. Yes, despite what the sensational dime novels might tell you, many frontier towns had strict, often rigidly enforced, laws about carrying firearms within city limits. In fact, some of the most famous gunfights in Western history happened precisely because of disputes over these very gun control laws. Tonight's test arrives in the form of 3 cowboys who rode into town about an hour before sunset. They are clearly not locals. Their horses are travel, worn, their coats streaked with dust from long, arduous riding, and they possess the unmistakable look of men who've been living rough for weeks. More importantly, each of them is wearing a gun belt, a blatant violation of the municipal ordinance that explicitly prohibits carrying firearms within the town limits. The ordinance itself is painted crudely but clearly on a weathered wooden sign at each end of Main Street, a stark declaration. By order of the mayor, no person shall carry firearms within the town limits. All weapons must be surrendered to the town marshal or county sheriff upon arrival. Fine for violation, $10 or 10 days in jail. $10 is a significant amount of money, more than most working men make in an entire week. But 10 days in jail, you know, is far worse, especially for cowboys who are probably already well behind schedule, trying to get their herd to market. Most visitors comply with the gun law without argument, but these 3, you sense, look like they might have different ideas about municipal authority. You approach them cautiously, outside Murphy's General Store, where they've tied their horses and appear to be engaged in a quiet discussion about supplies. Up close, they look even rougher than they did from a distance. Their clothes are stained with trail dust and dried sweat, their faces deeply weathered by the relentless sun and wind, and their boots are caked with thick mud, suggesting they've been riding through some truly challenging country. "Evening, gentlemen," you say, your voice friendly but firm, a careful balance. "I'm Sheriff Anderson. Welcome to Dusty Creek." The tallest of the 3, a lean man with pale, assessing eyes and a mustache stained yellow by tobacco juice, turns slowly to face you. His hand rests casually, almost imperceptibly, on the butt of his Colt, and his stance suggests, with an unsettling confidence, that he knows exactly how to use it. "Sheriff," he acknowledges, with a nod that is more an acknowledgement of your presence than a sign of respect. "I need to inform you about our municipal ordinance regarding firearms." You continue, gesturing subtly toward the posted sign. "All weapons need to be surrendered to law enforcement while you're in town. You can reclaim them when you leave." The 3 cowboys exchange quick, meaningful glances, and you can practically see them, in the silent space between heartbeats, calculating the odds. There is one of you and 3 of them. Your gun is holstered, its leather creaking softly, while theirs are easily accessible, already resting beneath their hands. From their perspective, this, you realize, probably looks like a pretty good bet. "Now, Sheriff," the tall one drawls, his voice carrying the slow, deliberate cadence of someone from Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. "We're just passing through, planning to buy some supplies and move on. Seems like a lot of trouble for a short visit." This, you know, is the critical moment, the one that inevitably separates successful sheriffs from dead ones. You've got to enforce the law unequivocally, but you also have to stay alive long enough to enforce it again tomorrow. 3 armed men against 1 sheriff are not great odds, especially when your nearest backup is the federal marshal, who is far more concerned with his prisoner than with the petty matters of municipal law enforcement. Your mouth goes dry, suddenly tasting like old leather, and you can feel your heart beating faster, a frantic bird trapped in your ribs. The late afternoon sun feels suddenly hot against your face, and your shirt, you notice, sticks uncomfortably to your back with nervous sweat. Your hand wants to drift almost instinctively toward your gun, but you force it to stay perfectly still. Any sudden, unexpected movement, you know, could trigger a gunfight that you are not likely to survive. I understand you're just passing through, you say, keeping your voice steady, remarkably calm. But the law applies to everyone in town. Visitors and residents alike. I'm sure you can appreciate that. The second cowboy, shorter and stockier than his companion, spits tobacco juice into the dirt near your feet. A deliberate, challenging gesture. What if we just finish our business real quick and ride on out? No harm, no foul. Can't allow that, you reply, your voice firm. But I can promise you'll get your weapons back in the same condition when you leave. I'll even give you a receipt. The third member of their group, a young man who can't be more than 20, looks visibly nervous. His eyes keep darting anxiously between his hardened companions and you, and his hand trembles slightly where it rests on his gun butt. Young men with guns and frayed nerves, make for particularly dangerous combinations. This is bullshit, the tall cowboy finally says, his voice laced with obvious reluctance and simmering resentment. We ain't causing trouble. We just want to buy some beans and coffee and get back on the trail. And you can do that, you agree. Your gaze steady as soon as you surrender your weapons. For a long, tense moment, nobody moves. The evening air is still, a heavy quiet hanging over Main Street, broken only by the soft sounds of horses shifting their weight and the distant tinny piano music drifting from salty Sue's. You can smell the cowboys' unwashed bodies, a mixture of stale sweat and trail dust, mingled with the scents of horse and leather, and something else, something subtle and sharp that might be fear. Your own sweat, you realize, has turned cold, and you can feel it trickling, a chilling sensation down your sides. Then, unexpectedly, salvation arrives in the sturdy, reassuring form of Big Jim, the blacksmith. He emerges from his shop, his massive frame silhouetted against the forge's glow, carrying a hammer that looks as though it could cave in a skull without much effort. Jim doesn't say anything, he just walks over, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, and stands slightly behind, and to the left of you, close enough to intervene if things go badly. A silent, powerful presence. The presence of backup changes the dynamic immediately, a palpable shift in the air. It's no longer 3 against 1. It's now 3 against 2, and one of those two, you think with a small internal sigh of relief, is a man who could probably bend horseshoes with his bare hands. The cowboys, you can almost see it, quickly recalculate their odds, and apparently they don't like the new math. "All right, Sheriff," the tall cowboy says, his voice thick with obvious reluctance and a grudging defeat. "We'll play by your rules, one by one." They unbuckle their gun belts, the leather creaking softly, and hand them over. The weapons are well-maintained Colts, each, you note, worth more than most people in town make in a month. You make careful note of the serial numbers, your fingers brushing the cold steel, and write out meticulous receipts, because losing a cowboy's gun, you know, is a good way to find yourself on the wrong end of a very personal vendetta. You can reclaim these when you're ready to leave town, you tell them. Just find me or leave word at Murphy's store. They nod, a quick curt gesture, and head into the general store, grumbling under their breath. But crucially, complying with the law, Big Jim watches them go, then turns to you with a wide grin that shows several missing teeth. "Thought you might need a hand," he rumbles. "Much obliged, Jim. Buy you a drink later. I'll hold you to that." As Jim heads back to his shop, the rhythmic clang of his hammer resuming, you realize with a sudden, unsettling clarity that you're shaking slightly, a delayed reaction to the surge of adrenaline that has been coursing through your system. Gun control enforcement, you know, is one of the more dangerous aspects of frontier law enforcement because it requires confronting armed men and calmly demanding they disarm themselves. It's a job that requires equal parts courage, diplomacy, and perhaps most importantly, a generous measure of luck. The rest of the evening passes more quietly, the town settling into a hushed rhythm. You check on Sam Crane, who seems to have settled into a resigned acceptance of his grim situation, his figure small and defeated in the dim light of the jail cell. You make your final evening rounds, checking that businesses are securely locked and that the fragile temporary peace is holding. The three cowboys finish their shopping, retrieve their weapons without incident, their movements quicker now, and ride out of town just as the last sliver of the sun disappears behind the western horizon, leaving the sky streaked with the lingering remnants of fiery orange and deep purple. But as you finally settle in for the night, in your small, familiar room above Murphy's store, you can't quite shake the chilling feeling that today's challenges were merely a preview of worse things to come. Sam Crane's unjust arrest, has stirred up a simmering resentment against distant federal authority. The gun control confrontation, though resolved peacefully, reminded everyone that enforcing the law sometimes means risking your very life. And somewhere out there in the vast, unseen expanses of the territory, vigilante groups might be quietly organizing, their shadows lengthening, preparing to take justice into their own hands. Being a sheriff in the Wild West, you reflect as the darkness deepens, isn't just about keeping the peace or arresting obvious criminals. It's about navigating a complex, treacherous web of conflicting jurisdictions, competing loyalties, and constant, insidious danger. Every decision you make, no matter how small, has consequences that ripple through the entire community. Every confrontation, no matter how minor, could, in an instant, be your last. And every morning you will wake up, and you will wonder if today, this very day, will be the day your luck finally runs out. As you blow out your kerosene lamp, the flame flickering and then dying, plunging your room into deep shadow, and settle into your rope bed with its scratchy straw mattress, you listen to the familiar sounds of the frontier night, carried on the wind that whistles through the gaps in the wooden walls. The distant tinny sound of piano music from Salty Sue's, a mournful faraway melody, and somewhere in the impenetrable darkness, the lonely howl of a coyote, a sound that, to your weary ears, seems almost like laughter. Tomorrow, will bring new challenges, new conflicts, and new opportunities to make enemies. But tonight you are alive, you have kept the peace, and you have survived another day in one of the most dangerous jobs in America. In the unpredictable world of frontier law enforcement, that, you realize, is about as much as any sheriff can ever truly hope for. A cry in the darkness. 3 days later, the fragile peace of your sleep is shattered, not by the usual gentle morning sounds, but by a frantic, insistent pounding on your door, and a voice, shrill with panic, shouting words that send ice, cold and sharp, through your very veins, even before you are fully conscious. The voice, you recognize, belongs to young Tommy Fletcher, the youngest worker at the telegraph office, and he is yelling something indistinct, something about a stage robbery and dead men scattered along the long, unforgiving Wichita Road. Your feet hit the cold floor running. A jolt of raw sensation, and immediately you are reminded of just how brutal frontier mornings can be. The air in your small room is so cold, it burns your lungs with every ragged breath, and your exhalations create white clouds that would make a locomotive jealous. Your clothes from yesterday, still draped over the chair, are stiff with dried sweat and dust, rough against your skin. But there is no time, absolutely no time, to worry about comfort when people are dying on the very roads you are sworn to protect. "Sheriff!" Tommy's voice cracks with panic, shrill and desperate. "You got to come quick. Stage got hit about 10 miles out. Driver dead, passengers scattered, and they made off with the strongbox." You are pulling on your boots as he talks, your fingers fumbling with the laces, each piece of worn leather feeling like a slab of ice against your skin. Your gun belt settles around your waist with its familiar, comforting weight. But this morning it feels heavier than usual, like a grim reminder that today, this very day, might be the day you actually have to use the damn thing for something more serious than merely intimidating drunk cowboys. How many robbers, you ask, grabbing your worn hat and the rifle that leans against the wall beside your bed. The rifle is an old Winchester. It's wood-scarred, it's metal-dulled, a veteran that has seen better years. But it is reliable, you know, and accurate enough for the brutal demands of frontier work. More importantly, it holds more shots than your Colt, a fact that might truly matter if you are facing multiple armed men. Don't know for sure, Tommy replies, bouncing nervously on his feet, like he urgently needs to use an outhouse. The passenger who made it back to town said maybe 4 or 5 men, all armed with rifles. They killed old Pete Collins outright when he tried to reach for his shotgun. Pete Collins, you knew Pete, a grizzled old-timer, his face a roadmap of sun and wind, who had been driving stages for more years than most people had been breathing. He was tough as saddle leather and twice as smart, a man who knew the roads like the back of his hand. But even experience and caution, you grimly acknowledge, don't mean much when you're facing armed road agents who shoot first and don't bother with questions later. This, you realise, is the moment when being a sheriff stops being about collecting paltry taxes and maintaining a semblance of order, and abruptly starts being about tracking down ruthless killers who won't hesitate to add another lawman to their body counts. Stage robbery is legally a federal crime, but the nearest federal marshal is probably days away, a distant, unreachable authority. The jurisdiction, you know, technically falls to you. And that means gathering a posse, however small, and riding out to face men who have already proven, with chilling efficiency, that they are willing to kill. Your first immediate stop is the telegraph office, a small dusty room filled with the rhythmic clack of the machine. There you send urgent messages, the words flying through the wires to the county seat and to the nearest federal marshal. Ezra, the nervous telegraph operator, his fingers perpetually stained with machine oil and his breath smelling of strong coffee, taps out your messages with fingers that shake slightly, a visible tremor. Bad news travels swiftly along the telegraph lines, carried on the unseen currents of urgency. And by noon, every lawman within 100 miles will know, with grim certainty, that the dusty creek road isn't safe for travel. Any word back yet from other counties? You ask Ezra, trying to keep your voice steady, searching for any pattern. Similar robberies? Men matching these descriptions? Ezra adjusts his wire, rimmed spectacles, pushing them higher on his nose, and shuffles through a pile of crackling telegrams. Nothing recent, he mutters, but there was a stage hit near Abilene last month. Similar description. 4 or 5 men, well armed, took the strongbox and rode south. This, you realise, suggests you're dealing with professional road agents, not just opportunistic locals. Professional robbers are far worse news than amateurs, because they are experienced, organised, and they have probably meticulously planned escape routes and hideouts in advance. They are also, you know, far more likely to kill witnesses, since they understand with cold calculation that dead men can't identify them in court. Your next, most critical stop is finding men willing to ride with you in pursuit of armed killers. This, you acknowledge, is where the rubber meets the road in frontier law enforcement. Your authority is only as good as your ability to convince other men to risk their very lives backing you up. And convincing people to chase armed robbers, you quickly discover, isn't exactly a simple sales pitch. Big Jim, the blacksmith, is your first recruit, and thankfully he agrees without much persuasion, his large face set with grim determination. Can't have killers thinking our roads are easy pickings, he rumbles, strapping on a gun belt that looks like it was built for someone his size. I'll grab my horse and meet you at the stable. Your second recruit is more problematic. Frank Morrison, Jake's older brother, and a decent shot with a rifle, agrees to join the posse, but immediately, with a pragmatic shrewdness, starts negotiating terms. What's the pay for posse work, he asks, his eyes assessing, and who covers our expenses if we're out for days? This, you realise, is one of the ugly realities of frontier law enforcement that nobody likes to discuss. Posse members are, by law, entitled to payment for their time and compensation for their expenses, but the county budget for such things is practically non-existent, a phantom allowance. You're asking men to risk their lives for minimal pay, and everyone you know is acutely aware of it. Standard posse rate is $2 a day, plus expenses. You tell Frank, though you're not entirely sure the county will actually pay that much. Food and ammunition covered, if we're out overnight. Frank nods reluctantly, his jaw tight. I'm in, but I want that in writing. By the time you've assembled a posse, the sun is well up, already climbing high in the sky, and you've lost precious hours that the robbers have used to put considerable distance between themselves and their pursuers. Your group consists of yourself, Big Jim, Frank Morrison, and 2 ranch hands from the Circle K who volunteered when their foreman heard about the robbery. 5 men total, probably enough to handle 4 or 5 robbers if you can actually catch them, but definitely not enough. You think with a chilling dread if they've joined up with a larger gang. The ride to the robbery site takes you through some of the most beautiful yet treacherously unforgiving country in Kansas. Rolling hills carpeted with buffalo grass stretch to the horizon, a vast undulating green broken only by rocky outcroppings and stands of cottonwood trees that dutifully follow the winding creek beds. It's the kind of landscape that looks peaceful and welcoming, almost idyllic, until you realize how many places it offers for armed men to hide and ambush pursuing lawmen. A trail of blood and dust your horse. A sturdy bay mare named Duchess picks her way carefully, diligently, along the deeply rutted stage road. She's not the prettiest animal, her coat a dull brown, her movements ungraceful, but she is reliable, you know, and exceptionally sure-footed, qualities that matter far more than speed when you're riding into potential danger. The worn leather of your saddle creaks softly with each of her steps, a familiar, comforting sound, and the rhythmic thump of her hooves creates a steady percussion that might, under different, less urgent circumstances, be strangely soothing. The robbery site, when you finally reach it, looks like a scene ripped from the very depths of hell. The stagecoach sits at an unnatural, broken angle, one wheel completely shattered, its passenger compartment riddled with grim, dark bullet holes. Pete Collins lies crumpled beside the driver's seat, his body already attracting a buzzing swarm of flies, despite the cool morning air. Blood has soaked deeply into the dirt around him, staining the dust into a dark, sticky mud that your boots squelch through as you grimly examine the scene. Jesus, whispers one of the ranch hands, a young man, his face pale with shock, who has probably never seen a violent death before. He looks as though he might lose his breakfast at any moment. Stay focused, you tell him, though your own stomach is churning unpleasantly. We need to read this scene and figure out which way they went. The evidence tells a grim, stark story written in dust and blood. The robbers, with ruthless efficiency, positioned themselves behind a rocky outcropping, perhaps 50 yards from the road, giving them clear fields of fire at the approaching stage. They waited with chilling patience until the coach was in the worst possible position, unable to turn around, with no cover whatsoever for the passengers or the driver. The attack, you realize, was swift, brutal, and executed with cold, professional precision. Bullet holes in the coach show that they used rifles, not pistols, which means they were shooting from a distance rather than riding up close. That, you know, suggests discipline and planning, rather than the wild, chaotic attack of desperate amateurs. The strongbox has been pried open with professional tools, not just shot apart or bashed with rocks, a clear sign of methodical crime. Most ominously, there are unsettling signs that they took the time to search the passengers' belongings thoroughly. Clothes and personal items are scattered carelessly around the coach, suggesting the robbers weren't in any great hurry to leave. That level of confidence, you realize, is deeply troubling. It means they either know the country well enough to be certain of their escape, or they have local help, a chilling thought. tracks head south toward the creek. Big Jim reports, crouching beside clear hoof prints pressed into the soft earth. 5 horses, like the witness said. They're not trying to hide their trail. That, you consider, is either an act of supreme arrogance or another, more insidious sign of professional planning. Experienced outlaws, sometimes leave obvious false trails to deliberately mislead pursuit, then double back and head in a completely different direction. Following the clear trail might lead you into a cunning ambush, but ignoring it might allow the real killers to escape entirely. You make the difficult decision to follow the obvious trail, but carefully, with every sense heightened. The posse spreads out in a loose, watchful line, each man responsible for watching a different sector. It's basic military tactics, applied to the unpredictable chaos of law enforcement. If the robbers are waiting in ambush, at least they won't be able to kill all of you with the first devastating volley. The trail leads through increasingly rough country, following winding deer paths and narrow cattle trails that twist between stands of trees and rocky formations. Your horse's breathing becomes laboured as the terrain steepens. A harsh, rhythmic rasp, and sweat begins to foam on her neck and shoulders, a tell-tale sign of exertion. The sun climbs higher, relentlessly, turning the cool morning into a warm, oppressive afternoon that makes your wool coat feel like you're wearing a stove. After 2 hours of careful, painstaking tracking, Frank Morrison calls a halt. "Sheriff, we got a problem." He's pointing to a spot where the trail, with cunning precision, splits into 3 different directions. The robbers have apparently divided their group, with some heading toward the river, others angling back toward the main road, and a third group disappearing into a bewildering maze of rocky hills that could easily hide an entire army. This, you realize with a sinking heart, is the nightmare scenario for pursuing lawmen, professional criminals who know exactly how to split up and confuse pursuit. Following the wrong trail could waste precious, irreplaceable time and allow the killers to escape entirely. But following all 3 trails means dividing your already small posse into groups too small to handle any armed resistance. "What do you think, Sheriff?" Big Jim asks, and you can hear the uncertainty, the quiet doubt in his usually confident voice. This, is the moment when leadership matters most, when men are looking to you for decisions that could get them killed if you guess wrong. Your mouth tastes like copper pennies, and your shirt is soaked with nervous sweat, clinging uncomfortably to your back despite the cooling afternoon breeze. Every choice you make, carries life or death consequences, not just for yourself, but for the men who trusted you enough to follow you into danger. The weight of the badge on your chest feels like it might drag you right into the ground. "We follow the river trail," you decide, the words firm, partly based on logic, and partly on a sudden, powerful gut instinct. River means water, and men who've been riding hard need water. The other trails might be false leads. It's a guess, and everyone is aware of it. But frontier law enforcement is full of educated guesses, made with incomplete information under dangerous, high-stakes circumstances. Sometimes you guess right and catch the criminals, sometimes you guess wrong and they get away. And sometimes, with chilling certainty, you guess wrong and end up dead. The river trail leads through a narrow canyon where the walls rise steeply on both sides, looming over you, and the only escape route is forward or back. It's perfect ambush country, and every man in your posse knows it. Hands rest on gun butts, a silent preparation. Eyes scan the rim rocks constantly, searching for movement, and everyone jumps at shadows that might or might not be armed men. "Don't like this much," whispers one of the ranch hands, his voice thin with apprehension. "Feels like we're walking into a trap." "Everything feels like a trap when you're chasing killers," you reply, trying with all your might to sound more confident than you feel. Stay alert and keep moving. The canyon floor is sandy and soft, muffling the sound of hoofbeats, creating an eerie quiet, but perfectly preserving clear tracks that show the robbers passed this way very recently. Fresh horse droppings, still soft and warm, suggest you're maybe an hour behind them, close enough to be dangerous, but not close enough to see them yet. Then Big Jim raises his hand, a massive silent signal for silence and immediate danger. Ahead, a thin wisp of smoke rises from a small campfire, curling lazily into the still air, and through the sparse trees you can make out the indistinct shapes of horses and men. You've found them. But now you realize you have to figure out how to arrest armed killers without getting your posse shot to pieces in the process. The robbers have chosen their campsite well. It's in a small clearing beside the river, with good fields of fire in multiple directions and escape routes that lead deeper into the surrounding hills. They're not hiding, which suggests either supreme confidence or a cunning trap, meticulously designed to lure pursuing lawmen into killing range. 5 men, like the witness said, Big Jim whispers, his voice low, counting the figures moving around the camp, all armed, and they've got sentries posted. This, you know, is the moment that truly separates successful sheriffs from dead heroes. You could charge in with guns blazing, a desperate, valiant attempt, and probably kill some of the robbers. But you'd also, you know, with a sickening certainty, probably lose half your posse in the process. You could try to negotiate surrender, but men who've already committed murder, you realize, rarely give up without a fight. Or you could wait for reinforcements, but every hour of delay gives the criminals more time to escape, to vanish into the vast, unforgiving landscape. We're going to surround them, you decide, your voice firm, resolute. Jim, take one of the ranch hands and circle around to block the north trail. Frank, you and the other man cover the south approach. I'll call for surrender from the front. If shooting starts, aim carefully and don't hit each other. It's a plan that might work or might get everyone killed, but it's the best option you can think of with limited men and time running out. The posse splits up, moving carefully through the trees and rocks to take their assigned positions. Every snapped twig sounds loud enough to wake the dead, and every bird call makes you wonder if it's actually a signal between the robbers. When everyone is in position, you take a deep, ragged breath and step into the clearing with your rifle ready. County Sheriff, you call out, your voice echoing in the sudden silence. You're surrounded, throw down your weapons and surrender. For a moment everything freezes, as if a painting has suddenly come to life, then stopped. The robbers stop what they're doing and stare at you. Your posse members aim their weapons from concealment, their figures still as statues. Even the horses seem to sense the profound tension, standing perfectly still, their ears pricked. Then one of the robbers, a bearded man wearing a brown hat pulled low over his eyes, slowly reaches for his pistol, and you know with a cold certainty that the shooting is about to start. Echoes of the gunfight that follows is nothing, absolutely nothing, like the clean, dramatic shootouts you might see in travelling shows or read about in dime novels. It's a brutal, chaotic maelstrom of noise, terror, and confusion, all mixed together in a deadly, swirling vortex that seems to last forever, and yet ends in mere seconds. Gunsmoke fills the clearing, like a thick, choking fog, obscuring vision. Muzzle flashes bloom in the dim light like deadly, fleeting flowers, and the sharp, whining sound of bullets ricocheting off rocks creates a terrifying symphony of violence that, you know, will haunt your dreams for years to come. When the acrid smoke finally clears, slowly drifting away on the gentle breeze, 2 robbers lie dead on the dusty ground. One is wounded, groaning softly, and 2, you grimly note, have managed to escape, vanishing into the hills like ghosts. Your posse is intact, miraculously, but deeply shaken. Frank Morrison has a superficial bullet graze on his arm, a red streak across his skin, and one of the ranch hands is nursing bruised ribs from diving desperately behind a large boulder. The wounded robber, a young man who can't be more than 25, is bleeding from a shoulder wound. his face pale with blood loss and raw fear, begging for medical attention, please. He gasps, his voice thin and reedy. "I need a doctor. I'll tell you everything. Just get me to a doctor." And that's when you realise with a sudden, weary clarity that surviving the gunfight is only the very beginning of your problems. You've got wounded men who desperately need medical attention, dead bodies that need to be transported grimly back to town, and precious evidence that needs to be meticulously preserved. Plus, you have a prisoner who needs to be guarded. All of this, you know, has to be accomplished with a tiny posse in the middle of hostile country where the escaped robbers might, at any moment, be planning a rescue attempt. The ride back to town takes most of the remaining daylight, a long, arduous journey that tests every limit of endurance you thought you had. The wounded robber is tied to his saddle, moaning softly with every jarring step his horse takes. The dead men are draped, unceremoniously, over their horses like sacks of grain, and the raw, metallic smell of blood and death follows your little procession, like a dark, inescapable cloud. By the time you finally reach Dusty Creek, worn and bone, tired, word of the gunfight has already spread through the town, carried on the wind, and half the town is waiting on Main Street to see the grim results. Some faces show satisfaction, a grim approval that justice has been served, swift and decisive. Others display concern, a quiet unease about the violence that has come so close to their peaceful community. And a few, you notice, show the kind of cold calculation that suggests they're wondering whether having a sheriff who gets into gunfights is ultimately good or bad for business. As you lock the surviving robber in your jail, the heavy iron door clanging shut, and begin the endless paperwork that will meticulously document this day's brutal events, you realise that being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't just about enforcing the letter of the law. It's about making split-second decisions with life or death consequences, leading men into grave danger, and living with the raw, pervasive results of violence that seems to follow you wherever you go. Tonight, as you finally collapse into your rope bed with its scratchy straw mattress, every muscle in your body aches with a profound bone-deep weariness, a result of tension and extreme exertion. Your hands shake slightly as you blow out the kerosene lamp, a delayed, almost imperceptible reaction to the adrenaline and fear that carried you through the day. Outside your window, the normal, familiar sounds of the frontier night seem different somehow. Every distant creak, every rustle of leaves, might be the escaped robbers coming back for revenge, or new, unknown criminals planning fresh violence. Being a sheriff in the Wild West means never truly being off-duty, never truly being safe, and never knowing when the next crisis will demand everything you have to give. It's a job that ages men quickly and buries them young, where success is measured not in commendations or promotions, but in simply surviving long enough to see another sunrise. 2 weeks after the stage robbery gunfight, a period filled with a strange, unsettling quiet, you discover, with a chilling clarity, that surviving armed criminals is nothing. Absolutely nothing compared to surviving the intricate, unforgiving labyrinth of frontier politics. And your education in the darker, more insidious side of law enforcement begins with a late-night visit from men whose faces you can't quite see in the deep, shifting shadows. You are awakened not by shouting or the sharp crack of gunfire, but by the soft, almost imperceptible scrape of boots on wooden floorboards, and the unmistakable sound of someone trying very, very hard to be quiet. Your eyes snap open in the profound darkness of your small room, and immediately every nerve in your body goes on high alert. Out here, you know, people who sneak around in the dark usually have reasons that do not, under any circumstances, bode well for sleeping sheriffs. The footsteps stop just outside your door, and you hear the low murmur of voices. At least 3 men, perhaps more, their words indistinct. Your hand moves slowly, deliberately toward the Colt that hangs on the bedpost, its cold metal a familiar weight. Your fingers close around the familiar grip, with the kind of careful, agonizing silence that comes from knowing your very life might depend on not making any noise. Then comes the knock, so polite, almost gentle. But there's something about the rhythmic cadence that makes your skin crawl. A deep, primal unease, like the soft, measured knock of an undertaker who has come, uninvited, to measure you for a pine box. Sheriff Anderson, the voice is cultured, educated, with the kind of careful, precise pronunciation that suggests someone trying to sound eminently reasonable while discussing profoundly unreasonable things. "We'd like a word, if you don't mind." You mind very much. But saying so doesn't seem like the smartest option when you're outnumbered and wearing nothing but long underwear. "Just a minute," you call out. Your voice a little rough, pulling on your pants and boots with movements that feel clumsy and far too loud in the oppressive darkness. Your shirt sticks uncomfortably to your back with nervous sweat, and your hands shake slightly as you button it up. The gun belt settles around your waist like an old trusted friend, its familiar weight a cold comfort. But even armed, you feel exposed, vulnerable, naked. 3 against 1 you think is not good odds, especially when the 3 have had ample time to plan and position themselves while you're stumbling around in the dark trying to get dressed. You open the door to find 3 men standing in the narrow hallway, and their appearance immediately, unequivocally, tells you this is not a social visit. They're dressed like businessmen, their clothes clean, shirts pressed, boots polished, but they wear their respectability. You notice, like a disguise that doesn't quite fit, a costume that feels artificial. More importantly, they are all armed, and their hands rest casually, almost imperceptibly, near their weapons in a way that suggests, with chilling clarity, that they know exactly how to use them. "Gentlemen," you say, keeping your voice steady, remarkably calm, despite the cold, crawling fear that's making its slow ascent up your spine like a cold snake. "A little late for a social call, isn't it?" The leader is a tall man with silver hair, impeccably combed, and a mustache that has been meticulously waxed to perfection. He smiles with the kind of warmth that doesn't quite reach his eyes, a purely performative gesture. And when he speaks, his words carry the undeniable weight of money and immense influence. "Sheriff, I'm Thomas Blackwood, and these are my associates. We represent certain business interests in the county, and we have a proposition that might interest you." Thomas Blackwood. You've heard the name whispered in saloons and general stores, carried on the wind like a silent threat. A man who owns vast tracts of land, has interests in lucrative mining operations, and supposedly possesses enough political connections to make or break careers with a few carefully placed words. He's the kind of man, you know, who doesn't visit sheriffs unless he wants something. And what he wants, you already grimly suspect, usually involves bending or breaking the law. "What kind of proposition?" you ask, though you already know, with a sinking feeling that you don't want to hear the answer. Blackwood's smile widens, but it still doesn't touch his cold eyes. The kind that could make a man's career very prosperous, or very short. "May we come in?" It's phrased as a question, a polite inquiry, but the tone, you realize, makes it abundantly clear that refusing isn't really an option. You step aside and let them enter your small room, which immediately feels even smaller and more cramped with 4 armed men crowded into it. The air seems thicker, heavier, with a palpable tension and the unspoken weight of threats. "Nice place," Blackwood observes, though his tone suggests he finds it anything but nice, perhaps even contemptible cozy. It must be challenging, living on a sheriff's salary. And there it is, the opening gambit in what you're beginning to realize, with a sick feeling in your stomach, is a corruption pitch. These men aren't here to congratulate you on catching stage robbers, or to offer their assistance. They're here to buy you to own you, to turn you into their personal law enforcement tool, a badge for hire. "I get by," you reply carefully, your voice a little strained. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood?" One of Blackwood's associates, a shorter man with dead vacant eyes and faint scars on his knuckles, steps closer to your window and peers out into the darkness. "Nice view of Main Street from up here," he observes, his voice flat. "Bet you can see everything that goes on in town." The implication is clear, chillingly so. They know where you live, they know your routines, and they can get to you whenever they want. It's intimidation, cold and precise, wrapped in casual conversation, and it is, you realise, very effective. "Sheriff," Blackwood continues, his voice smooth as oiled leather, a deceptive calmness, "we're prepared to offer you an additional monthly salary, let's say $200, in exchange for certain considerations regarding law enforcement priorities in this county. $200 a month. That is more than your official annual salary. It's enough money to profoundly transform your life, better quarters, decent food, perhaps even the luxury of thinking about a future that doesn't involve getting shot by criminals or voted out by angry, disillusioned citizens. It's also enough money, to make you a bought man, owned by interests that probably don't have the community's best welfare at heart." What kind of considerations, you ask, though your stomach is already churning with the dreadful knowledge that you don't want to know. A web of conspiracy, the third man, who hasn't spoken yet, a thin, nervous-looking fellow with ink-stained fingers, and the pale complexion of someone who spends his life indoors, working with papers and numbers, produces a leather portfolio from inside his coat. When he opens the portfolio, you can clearly see maps, legal documents, and what appears to be a meticulous list of names. "Certain mining claims in the eastern part of the county," Blackwood explains, his voice devoid of emotion, "have been filed improperly. Current claimants are operating illegally, and we need law enforcement to evict them and restore proper legal ownership." This, you realise, is where sheriff corruption gets ugly, complicated, and deeply insidious. Mining claims are valuable, immensely so. Disputes over them are common, a constant source of friction, and the legal system out here is often too slow or too corrupt to resolve conflicts fairly. What Blackwood is proposing sounds, to your ears, like blatant claim jumping with official backing, using your badge, your lawful authority, to steal other people's property. "Who says the claims are illegal?" you ask, your voice tight with barely suppressed anger. The thin man with the portfolio speaks for the first time, his voice high and reedy, like a man who is far more comfortable with paperwork than with people. "The Territorial Land Office has irregularities in the filing dates and signatures, technical violations that nullify the original claims." Technical violations, you muse. In frontier legal systems, technicalities can be manufactured by men with enough money and influence to buy the right officials. What they're proposing isn't law enforcement. It's legalized theft adorned with a badge. "And if I'm not interested in your proposition?" you ask, though you already know the answer will be unpleasant, perhaps even deadly. Blackwood's smile disappears entirely, and suddenly the small room feels colder, the air heavy with unspoken threats. "Sheriff, you've been in this job. 6 weeks in that time? You've made enemies of federal law enforcement by questioning their methods. You've alienated local businessmen by enforcing gun control laws. And you've cost the county significant money pursuing stage robbers when negotiation might have been more economical." Each point hits you like a physical blow, a jarring impact because they are all, you realise, chillingly true. Your job performance viewed from certain angles does indeed look questionable. Federal Marshal Weidenman left town muttering about local sheriffs who don't understand proper procedure. Several businessmen have openly complained about the gun surrender policy affecting their customers, and the stage robbery pursuit, you grudgingly admit, did cost the county money for posse wages and expenses. "People are already questioning whether you're the right man for this job," Blackwood continues, his voice carrying the full weight of implied threats. It would be unfortunate if those questions became more vocal. The scary man by the window, his eyes like chips of flint, turns around and fixes you with a stare that makes your blood run cold. Course, sometimes, when folks ask too many questions about a sheriff's competence, they start wondering about other things too, like whether he might be taking money from criminals, or maybe even working with them road agents. It's a masterpiece of intimidation, chilling in its precision. They're simultaneously offering you money to be corrupt and threatening to accuse you of corruption if you don't take their money. It's the kind of political chess move that could destroy your career and possibly your life, regardless of what you choose. I need time to think about this, you say, hating how weak, how utterly unconvincing your voice sounds. Of course, Blackwood agrees, his pleasant smile returning, a cold mask. Take all the time you need, we'll check back in a few days for your answer. They file out of your room as quietly as they entered, their footsteps fading into the distance, leaving behind only the lingering, cloying smell of expensive tobacco and cheap cologne. You stand alone in the deep darkness, listening to their footsteps fade away, and wondering if you've just been given an offer you can't refuse, or a death sentence with a few days' delay. The rest of the night passes without sleep. You lie on your rope bed, staring at the unseen ceiling, trying desperately to figure out how a simple job of enforcing the law has suddenly, horribly, turned into a choice between corruption and career suicide. Outside your window, Dusty Creek sleeps peacefully, unaware that their sheriff is wrestling with decisions that could determine whether justice means law and order or simply whoever has the most money and influence. Morning brings new problems, starting with the grim discovery that your prisoner, the wounded stage robber, has developed a raging fever that is turning his jail cell into a pestilential hole that smells of death and desperation. The bullet wound in his shoulder has gone bad, probably infected, and he's alternating between delirious, incoherent rambling and periods of deep unconsciousness that suggest he might not survive to stand trial. "Sheriff," he gasps when you check on him, his face flushed an angry red with fever, his clothes soaked with sweat. "I got information, important information, but I need a doctor and I need protection." "What kind of information?" you ask, though you're more concerned with the sweet, sickly odour coming from his wound. It's the unmistakable scent of flesh starting to rot, and it suggests that even if you could afford a doctor, it might already be too late. "The stage robbery," he whispers, his voice barely audible, "wasn't random. Someone in town set it up. Someone who knew which coach was carrying the mining payroll. This hits you like a sudden, jarring punch to the gut. The stage robbery that nearly got you killed wasn't just opportunistic crime. It was an inside job planned by someone with access to shipping schedules and cargo information. Someone local, someone trusted. Someone who might be sitting quietly in church on Sunday mornings while planning murders for Monday." "Who?" you demand, but the prisoner has slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving you with more questions than answers. A bitter justice the fever mercifully breaks 2 days later, a brief respite. But by then your prisoner is too weak to talk coherently, his voice a faint whisper, and too sick to be moved. He dies that afternoon, quietly taking his secrets with him, and leaving you with a dead body that needs to be buried, and information that might have saved lives if you'd gotten it sooner. The funeral is a small, sombre affair, just you, the preacher, and 2 grim-faced men from the undertaker's establishment who handle the burial for a fee that, you realise with a sigh, comes out of your own pocket, because the county, in its infinite wisdom, won't pay for criminal burials. As you watch them slowly lower the pine box into the unforgiving ground, you can't help but think about all the things that man knew, all the names and connections, and all the justice that died with him, buried forever beneath the dusty earth. That evening, as you're making your quiet rounds, trying desperately to forget about dead prisoners and the insidious offers of corruption, you encounter another chilling reminder of why being a sheriff in the Wild West is far more complicated than just enforcing the law. A group of local ranchers has gathered outside Murphy's General Store, their figures silhouetted against the deepening twilight, and their conversation stops abruptly, their voices falling silent when they see you approaching. "Evening, Sheriff," says Ben Crawford, the foreman of the Circle K ranch, a man whose opinion carries considerable weight in local politics. His tone is polite, but undeniably cool, and the other ranchers nod in acknowledgement, without much enthusiasm, their faces grim. "Gentlemen," you reply, noting how they've subtly positioned themselves between you and the store entrance. "It's not exactly threatening," you concede, "but it's not entirely friendly either." "We've been talking," Crawford continues, his voice low, deliberate, about the security situation in the county. Stage robberies, road agents, federal marshals, arresting local businessmen. Folks are concerned. Here it comes, you think, a cold dread settling in your stomach. The conversation you've been dreading ever since Blackwood's late night visit. Local citizens organising to take law enforcement into their own hands, either because they don't trust official authority or because they simply want to control it themselves. What kind of security measures are you considering? You ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. Another rancher, a grizzled man named Pete Sullivan, spits tobacco juice into the dirt with the casual accuracy of long practice and fixes you with a hard, unwavering stare. "The kind that gets results, Sheriff. Road agents don't generally survive encounters with well-armed citizens who ain't concerned about legal procedures. Vigilante justice, lynch law summary execution without trials or legal representation. It's the dark, terrifying side of frontier democracy, where popular will triumphs over legal process, and might makes right. And once vigilante groups get organised and confident, they often decide that sheriffs who don't cooperate are, in fact, part of the problem that needs solving. I understand your concerns," you say carefully, choosing your words with precision, "but vigilante action tends to create more problems than it solves. Innocent people get hurt, legal authority breaks down, and pretty soon nobody knows who's enforcing what law." Crawford nods thoughtfully, but his expression suggests he's not entirely convinced, his eyes still holding a hint of suspicion. "Maybe so, Sheriff, but when legal authority can't protect honest citizens, what choice do folks have?" It's a fair question, you realise, and you don't have a good answer. Your legal authority couldn't prevent the stage robbery, it couldn't save Pete Collins' life, and it couldn't extract crucial information from a dying prisoner before it was too late. From the rancher's perspective, official law enforcement is failing, and they have legitimate reason to consider alternatives. "Give me a chance to make the system work," you say, knowing how weak, how utterly unconvincing it sounds. "I'm still learning the job, still building relationships with other law enforcement agencies. Things will improve." The ranchers exchange glances, a silent, knowing communication that suggests they're not entirely convinced, but Crawford nods politely. "We'll give you some more time, Sheriff, but if things don't improve soon, we may have to take steps to protect our own interests." As they disperse, their figures fading into the deepening twilight, you realise you're caught in a perfect storm of frontier politics. Corrupt businessmen want to buy your cooperation. Federal law enforcement questions your competence. Local citizens are organising vigilante groups because they don't trust official authority. And somewhere in this swirling mess, criminals are planning new crimes, their shadows lengthening, while you're struggling just to figure out who the good guys are supposed to be. Back in your room that night, you sit at your scarred wooden desk and try to make sense of the endless paperwork that's supposed to document your law enforcement activities: incident reports, expense vouchers, tax collection records, and correspondence with distant county officials. All of it scribbled by hand in your increasingly illegible scrawl. But as you work through the papers, slowly, meticulously, patterns begin to emerge that make your blood run cold. The stage that was robbed was carrying mining payroll for claims in the eastern part of the county, the very same area where Blackwood wants you to evict illegal claimants. The robbery happened on a schedule that suggests someone with access to shipping information provided precise details to the road agents. And the surviving robber's chilling claim about inside information suddenly, horribly, makes terrible sense. Someone arranged for the stage to be robbed, possibly to create financial pressure that would force the miners to abandon their claims. When that didn't work, they sent corrupt businessmen to buy a sheriff who would evict the miners legally, and if you refuse their offer, they'll probably arrange for you to have an accident or be accused of corruption yourself. It's a vast, intricate web of conspiracy that reaches from common road agents to seemingly respected businessmen, from valuable mining claims to the very heart of county politics. And you're caught, inextricably, in the middle of it, expected to choose sides in a conflict where every choice seems to lead, inevitably, to corruption or violence. As you blow out your kerosene lamp, the flames sputtering and dying, plunging your room into deep darkness, and settle into your rope bed. You listen to the familiar sounds of the frontier night and wonder how many other sheriffs have found themselves in similar impossible situations. How many have chosen corruption over conscience? How many have died trying to stay honest? And how many have simply disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only unanswered questions and whispered legends? Being a sheriff in the Wild West, you realize, isn't just about facing armed criminals or collecting taxes from reluctant citizens. It's about navigating a treacherous moral landscape where right and wrong are often determined by whoever has the most money, the most guns, or the most political influence. It's about making choices with incomplete information and living with consequences that can destroy communities, unravel careers, and extinguish lives. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new moral dilemmas, and new opportunities to choose between survival and principle. But tonight, in the profound darkness of your small room above Murphy's General Store, you are beginning to understand why so many frontier sheriffs lasted only a few months in office, and why the ones who survived were often the ones who learned to compromise with the very forces they were supposed to fight. The dawn of vigilance, your decision, when it finally comes, arrives 3 days later, delivered not through careful, agonizing deliberation, but through the kind of violent, abrupt awakening that reminds you why frontier justice moves fast and leaves little room for contemplation. You are jolted from uneasy sleep by the thunderous sound of hoofbeats and shouting voices that cut through the pre-dawn darkness like sharp knives through silk. "Sheriff! Sheriff Anderson!" The voice belongs to young Tommy Fletcher again, his tone frayed with panic. But this time, he's not alone. Through your grimy window, you can see torches bobbing erratically in the profound darkness, their flames dancing and the stark silhouettes of mounted men gathered ominously in the street below. Your stomach drops like a stone down a deep well, a cold, heavy sensation, because midnight crowds of armed men, you know, rarely bring good news to sleeping sheriffs. You pull on your clothes with shaking hands, your fingers fumbling clumsily with buttons and buckles as adrenaline floods your system. A cold rush. The biting morning air nips at your skin, but it's nothing compared to the deep, pervasive chill that runs down your spine when you realize with a dawning horror what you're probably about to face. In Montana Territory, just last year, Sheriff Henry Plummer found himself on the wrong end of vigilante justice when citizens discovered he'd been leading a gang of road agents called the Innocents. They hanged him, along with 20 other members of his criminal organization, and the story, you know, has become a cautionary tale whispered in sheriff's offices across the entire frontier. When you step outside, the scene that greets you looks like something from a fever dream. At least 30 men on horseback fill Main Street, their faces hidden by the deep shadows cast by their hats and the flickering torchlight, their hands resting casually on their weapons. Torches cast dancing, distorted light that turns familiar buildings into alien, menacing shapes and transforms your neighbours into menacing, unreadable strangers. The air smells of burning pitch, horse sweat, and something else, a metallic, acrid scent of fear and violence that you are learning grimly to recognise. Sheriff Anderson calls out a voice from the crowd, and you recognise Ben Crawford's tone despite the formal distance in his words. "We need to talk." But this, you realise, isn't talking. This is a show of force, meticulously designed to make it abundantly clear that you're outnumbered, outgunned, and rapidly running out of options. The men before you represent the local power structure, ranchers, business owners, influential citizens, who've decided that official law enforcement isn't serving their interests. They're not a mob in the traditional sense, not a chaotic rabble, but they're not exactly a friendly delegation either. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" you ask, your voice remarkably steady, carrying better than you expected, despite the raw fear that's making your heart hammer against your ribs like a trapped bird. Crawford urges his horse forward a few steps, closer, close enough that you can see his face in the flickering torchlight. His expression is grim, determined, and completely without humour. "We know about the offer you received from Thomas Blackwood and his associates. We also know about the mining claims they want you to help them steal." The words hit you like physical blows, a sickening impact. They know about the corruption attempt, which means either your room was watched or someone in Blackwood's organisation has loose lips. Either way, you're caught, irrevocably, between competing, dangerous forces with no safe ground to stand on. How? You manage to stammer, but another voice emerges from the crowd, cutting you off. Pete Sullivan, the grizzled rancher who's never been shy about expressing his opinions, his voice rough and unyielding. "And we're here to make sure you understand that taking Blackwood's money would be a mistake that could prove fatal to your continued health. So there it is, the choice, presented in terms that couldn't be clearer. Take Blackwood's corruption money and face vigilante justice. Refuse his offer and face whatever threats he and his associates might make good on. Either way, you're caught between powerful, unforgiving forces that don't particularly care whether you survive the experience." "I hadn't made any decisions about Mr. Blackwood's proposition," you say carefully, your voice a low rasp. "Good," Crawford replies, his voice grim. "Because we're about to make the decision unnecessary." That's when you notice that some of the riders are leading extra horses, their shadowy forms indistinct in the flickering torchlight, with bundles tied across their saddles. In the wavering light, it takes you a moment, a sickening beat, to realize that the bundles are men, bound, gagged, and very much alive, judging by the struggling and muffled sounds of protest. "We found these gentlemen camped about 5 miles outside town," Crawford explains, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "Had some interesting items in their possession. Mining claim documents, maps of the Eastern Territory, and correspondence that makes their intentions quite clear. Blackwood and his associates, the vigilantes, have taken the law into their own hands and arrested the corrupt businessmen who tried to buy your cooperation. It's frontier justice in its most direct, brutal form, citizens organising to deal with problems that official law enforcement can't or won't handle. What are you planning to do with them?" you ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. Sullivan spits tobacco juice into the dirt with the casual accuracy of long practice, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Frontier justice, Sheriff, same as what happened to Sheriff Plummer and his road agents up in Montana. Sometimes the only way to clean up corruption is to permanently remove the sources of it. Lynch law summary execution without trial, legal representation, or due process. It's the dark side of frontier democracy, where popular will becomes judge, jury, and executioner. And while you can understand the deep frustration that drives men to such extremes, you also know that once vigilante groups start hanging people, they often find it easier to solve other problems the same way. Gentlemen, you say, choosing your words carefully, deliberately, I appreciate your concern about corruption in local law enforcement, but summary execution isn't justice, it's vengeance. And once you start down that road, it's hard to find your way back to lawful behaviour. Crawford's expression hardens, his jaw tightening. Sometimes vengeance is the only justice available, Sheriff. Legal systems that can be bought and sold don't protect honest citizens. They protect the people with enough money to buy protection. He's not wrong, and that's what makes this situation so incredibly dangerous. Corruption does make legal systems unreliable. Federal oversight is often distant and politically motivated, often seemingly uninterested in local affairs. And local officials, including sheriffs, can be bought, intimidated, or eliminated by interests with enough money and influence to manipulate the entire system. Give me custody of the prisoners, you say, knowing it's probably futile, but having to try, if only for your own conscience. Let me handle this through legal channels. There's evidence of criminal activity. I'll see that they stand trial. The laughter that ripples through the crowd is bitter, and knowing a chilling sound. These men have seen too much frontier politics to believe that legal channels will produce true justice. They've watched corrupt officials escape consequences, seen criminals buy their way out of punishment, and observed how money and influence can twist legal systems into tools of oppression rather than protection. "Sheriff," Crawford says, with something that might be pity in his voice, a surprising softness. "You're a good man trying to do an impossible job. But some problems can't be solved with badges and legal procedures. Sometimes you need rope and tall trees." That's when Thomas Blackwood himself speaks for the first time, his voice muffled by the gag, but still carrying the authoritative tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The vigilantes have removed his gag just enough for him to speak, probably to hear any last words or confessions he might offer. "Sheriff Anderson," he calls out, his voice hoarse, but still carrying that oily, deceptive charm. "I can make this worth your while. These men are acting outside the law. Help me, and I'll triple my original offer." Even facing death, Blackwood is trying to buy his way out of trouble. It's almost admirable in its consistency. A man so committed to corruption that he'll attempt bribery right up until the moment they put the noose around his neck. Triple. Sullivan laughs, a harsh, mirthless sound. "That's $600 a month, Sheriff." You hearing this man thinks he can buy his way out of a necktie party. But Crawford raises his hand for silence, and his expression grows thoughtful, a calculating look in his eyes. "Actually, Sheriff, this gives us an opportunity to demonstrate something important about justice and corruption." The vigilante leader turns to address his followers, his voice carrying the weight of a moral authority that comes from genuine, deeply held conviction. "This man just offered our sheriff $600 a month to betray his oath and help criminals escape justice. $600, more than most of you make in a year, Sheriff Anderson. What's your answer?" All eyes, a silent, unblinking sea, turn to you, and suddenly you understand that this isn't just about Blackwood's fate. It's a profound test of your character, your integrity, and your fitness to continue wearing a badge in this raw, unforgiving land. The vigilantes want to know whether you can be bought, whether you'll choose money over justice, whether you're part of the problem or part of the solution. Your mouth is dry as desert sand, and your heart pounds so hard you're surprised everyone can't hear it. Sweat trickles, cold and insistent, down your back, despite the cool morning air, and your hand shakes slightly as you consider the far-reaching implications of whatever you say next. "Mr. Blackwood," you say finally, your voice remarkably steady, carrying across the silent street, "I wouldn't take your money if you offered me the deed to half of Kansas. Corruption is exactly what's wrong with law enforcement in this territory, and I won't be part of it." The approval that rumbles through the crowd is almost palpable, a deep, collective sigh of relief and satisfaction. These men came here prepared to hang Blackwood and his associates, but they also came prepared to judge you. Your refusal of the bribe, even under these extreme life-threatening circumstances, has apparently passed their test. "Well said, Sheriff," Crawford nods, a small approving gesture. "But that still leaves us with the question of what to do with these criminals." What happens next isn't the dramatic, immediate lynching that Blackwood probably expected. Instead, it's something more complicated, more nuanced, and more typically frontier. A negotiated settlement that satisfies the demands of justice while carefully avoiding the grim finality of summary execution. A legacy of struggle after nearly an hour of intense discussion. heated argument, and thoughtful debate among the vigilantes. A consensus slowly, reluctantly emerges. Blackwood and his associates will be escorted to the county line and informed, with no room for ambiguity, that returning to the territory will result in immediate hanging. Their property and assets in the county will be forfeit, distributed among the miners whose claims they tried to steal, and they'll be given exactly 1 hour to gather personal belongings before their permanent exile begins. It's not legal justice in any traditional sense, you concede, but it is undeniably effective. The corrupt businessmen are removed as a threat, their victims are compensated, and the community is protected from future predation. Most importantly, no one dies, which, distinguishes this vigilante action from the bloodier, more brutal examples of frontier mob justice. As dawn breaks, a soft, pale light over Dusty Creek, and the vigilantes disperse to their homes and businesses. Their figures fading into the growing light, you find yourself standing alone in the street, watching Thomas Blackwood and his associates ride away under armed escort. Their departure marks the end of one threat to your integrity and the community's welfare. But it also highlights the uncomfortable, undeniable reality of frontier law enforcement. You couldn't have handled this situation through traditional legal channels. The evidence against Blackwood was largely circumstantial, a web of insinuation and suspicion. His political connections would have made prosecution difficult, almost impossible, and his vast financial resources could have bought legal representation that would have overwhelmed your meagre ability to pursue justice. The vigilantes accomplished in one night what the legal system might have taken months or years to achieve, if it achieved anything at all. But vigilante justice, is a double-edged sword that can cut both ways. The same powerful community pressure that removed corrupt businessmen could easily be turned against sheriffs who make unpopular decisions, enforce unpopular laws, or simply find themselves on the wrong side of local politics. The line between justice and mob rule, you realize, is often thinner than anyone wants to admit. Over the following weeks, life in Dusty Creek settles into something approaching normal, or at least what passes for normal in a frontier community where violence is always one bad decision away. The mining claims in the Eastern Territory are worked peacefully by their original claimants, the sound of picks and shovels a quiet, rhythmic hum. Stage robberies decrease significantly, probably because the inside information source has been eliminated, and your relationship with the community, you notice, visibly improves as word spreads that you refused corruption money, even when facing potential violence, a testament to your quiet integrity. But the entire experience has taught you uncomfortable truths about frontier law enforcement that will shape the rest of your career, however long that might be. Justice isn't always legal, law enforcement isn't always lawful, and survival often depends more on political awareness, a keen sense of the currents of local power, than on shooting skills or legal knowledge. You've also learned that being a sheriff in the Wild West means accepting moral ambiguity as a constant companion, a shadow that follows you everywhere. You couldn't save Pete Collins from road agents, couldn't extract crucial information from a dying prisoner, and couldn't handle corruption through traditional legal channels. But you could refuse bribes, you could support your community's desperate need for safety, and you could maintain enough integrity to earn the quiet, unspoken respect of honest citizens. The daily routine of a sheriff's work continues, with its familiar mixture of mundane tasks and life-threatening emergencies. You collect taxes from reluctant citizens, break up boisterous saloon fights, serve warrants on men who'd rather shoot than surrender, and maintain order in a community where disorder is always bubbling just beneath the surface. Some days you spend hours sweeping trash from Main Street, the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, or documenting property disputes in handwriting that grows more illegible with each passing week. Other days you ride out with grim determination in pursuit of horse thieves, cattle rustlers, or armed robbers who view sheriffs as mere obstacles to be eliminated rather than authorities to be respected. The pay remains pathetic, $200 a year, plus fees that you have to collect from people who often can't, or simply won't pay them. Your living quarters are still cold, cramped, and uncomfortable, a stark reminder of your humble station. Your equipment is still minimal and often unreliable, and your life expectancy is still considerably shorter than you'd prefer. But gradually, slowly, you begin to understand something that no one tells you when they pin the badge on your chest. Being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't really about enforcing the law. In its strictest sense, it's about helping communities create the very conditions where law becomes possible. You're not just arresting criminals, you're building the social structures and relationships that make civil life viable in an uncivilized place. Every tax you collect, however small, helps fund the fragile infrastructure that communities need to survive and grow. Every gun surrendered at the town limits demonstrates that collective safety can take precedence over individual preference. Every criminal you arrest or drive away sends the clear message that predatory behavior won't be tolerated. And every corrupt offer you refuse proves that integrity is possible, even in systems where corruption is rampant. The work is dangerous, profoundly underpaid, and often thankless. But it's also essential in ways that become clear only when you understand how fragile frontier communities really are. These settlements exist in a constant, delicate balance between order and chaos, between civilization and barbarism, between law and pervasive violence. Sheriffs don't create that balance, but they help maintain it long enough for communities to develop the institutions and relationships that make long-term stability possible. 6 months after your confrontation with Thomas Blackwood and the surprising vigilante justice, you receive a letter from the territorial governor commending your handling of the corruption attempt, a small official acknowledgement of your integrity. A year later, federal marshals, once suspicious, ask for your assistance in tracking down a cunning gang of counterfeiters, treating you as a respected colleague rather than a suspicious local official. And 2 years later, when Dusty Creek finally incorporates as a proper town with its own municipal government, you're elected to serve as the first official town marshal, a testament to the community's trust in you. None of this, of course, makes the job easier or safer. Horse thieves still need chasing, drunk cowboys still need calming, and corrupt officials still need resisting. But gradually, steadily, the infrastructure of civilization grows stronger, making each sheriff's task slightly less impossible than it was for their predecessors. Looking back across the years, and the countless sheriffs who wore badges in frontier communities, it's clear that most of them were ordinary men trying to do an extraordinary job under impossible circumstances. Some succeeded through immense courage, keen intelligence, and sheer luck. Others failed through corruption, incompetence, or simple, cruel misfortune. Many died young, victims of the very violence that made their profession so necessary. But collectively, they created something remarkable, the foundational bedrock for legal systems that could evolve from the raw, immediate justice of the frontier to modern law enforcement. They established precedents for community policing, demonstrated that law enforcement could truly serve citizens rather than just powerful interests, and proved that integrity was possible, even in systems where corruption was common. The Wild West era of American history lasted only a few decades, from roughly 1835 to 1895. But during that brief, tumultuous period, thousands of sheriffs, marshals, and local lawmen helped transform a lawless frontier into communities where families could raise children in safety, businesses could operate securely, and individuals could pursue opportunities without the constant, gnawing fear of violence or predation. Most of these men are forgotten now, their names known only to local historians and genealogists, quiet whispers in dusty archives. But their collective contribution to American civilization is immeasurable. They took jobs that nobody wanted, faced dangers that nobody should have to face, and accepted responsibilities that seemed utterly impossible to fulfill. And somehow, despite inadequate pay, minimal equipment and constant threats to their safety, enough of them succeeded, often enough, to make the crucial difference between chaos and civilization. Tonight. As you drift off to sleep in your own comfortable bed, in your own safe home, protected by legal systems that work imperfectly but persistently, remember the men who wore badges when wearing them meant risking everything for the possibility that someday some justice might become more than just a word painted on courthouse walls. The sheriffs of the Wild West weren't heroes in the grand Hollywood sense. They were ordinary people doing an extraordinary job under impossible circumstances. But their willingness to try, despite the overwhelming odds and dangers, helped create the very foundation for the world we live in today. In a very real sense, every peaceful night's sleep we enjoy is a testament to their courage, their stubbornness, and their quiet refusal to let the frontier stay wild forever. So sleep well, knowing that the long, arduous journey from frontier justice to modern law enforcement was built on the sacrifices of men who answered the call to serve, even when answering meant facing down armed criminals with nothing but a badge, a gun, and the unwavering hope that civilization was worth fighting for. Their legacy lives on in every police officer who chooses service over safety, every sheriff who protects the powerless, and every citizen who believes that justice is possible, even in an imperfect world. The Wild West is gone now, tamed by sheriffs who lasted long enough to see it become something better. But the courage they showed, the integrity they maintained, and the hope they carried forward remains as relevant today as it was in the dusty streets of frontier towns where the law was whatever good men were willing to fight for.